Jesse James, the most notorious outlaw of the Wild West. Jesse James stands out as perhaps the most reprehensible individual in American history. He exhibits an utter lack of fear and possesses no more remorse for committing cold-blooded murder than he does for having his morning meal. To some, he is merely a lawless criminal. To others, he embodies the spirit of a hero. Few figures in American history evoke as much controversy as he does. He became a representation of the division between the North and South during the American Civil War, a conflict that left an indelible mark on his life, driving him to seek vengeance against those who had bested him. He opted for a life of crime, engaging in numerous robberies of banks, stagecoaches, and trains. The most legendary outlaw of the American West, Jesse James, was singularly focused on revenge. To delve deeper into his remarkable life, I invite you to journey with me into the depths of the Far West. This saga commences with bloodshed, suffering, and a profound sense of injustice. Jesse Woodson James was born on September 5, 1847, in Clay County, Missouri. A few years prior, his parents, Robert and Zerelda James, had chosen to settle in this region. They resided in a modest three-room home with their children, Frank, the eldest, Jesse, and the youngest, Susan. The James family earned their livelihood through hemp farming and, like many other areas in the South, relied on the institution of slavery. In 1848, whispers began to circulate throughout Missouri regarding the discovery of significant amounts of a particularly valuable metal in the American West. The gold rush had commenced, prompting many, including Robert James, Jesse's father, to venture to California in pursuit of wealth. In September 1850, destiny intervened, leading to the untimely departure of a man from his life. While in the gold fields of the West, he succumbed to illness, passing away far from his loved ones and leaving behind a 3-year-old Jesse as an orphan. Zerelda, now bereaved, faced the daunting task of raising her 3 children alone. A woman of remarkable strength and resolve, she endeavored to care for her offspring to the best of her ability. However, following her husband's death, financial hardships compelled her to relinquish her farm, resulting in Frank, Jesse, and Susan being placed with another family. In her pursuit of financial stability and the return of her children, Zerelda resolved to remarry. On September 12, 1855, she wed Dr. Reuben Samuel. This union allowed Zerelda to reunite with her children and restore her life on the farm. The James family appeared to be emerging from their trials. By the autumn of 1860, Jesse James was 13 years old and had just enrolled in school for a new academic year, unaware that it would be his final one. Before reaching adulthood, young Jesse would find himself embroiled in a fratricidal conflict that would devastate his nation. His existence would soon be characterized by relentless strife, fueling a desire for vengeance. The American Civil War erupted in 1861, immediately following the election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican committed to the abolition of slavery. Since the early 19th century, the northern and southern states had been embroiled in disputes over various economic, political, and cultural matters. Slavery, however, was the pivotal issue that ignited the conflict. The southern states, which relied heavily on slavery, promptly declared their intentions. Upon Lincoln's election, they announced their secession from the Union. Following through on their threats, they established the Confederate States of America and engaged in war against the northern states, known as the Union. The James family, aligned with Southern principles and owners of 7 slaves, naturally supported the Confederate cause. Jesse's older brother, Frank, who was 18 years old, enlisted to fight for the Confederacy in early 1861. At that time, Jesse was only 13 and too young to join the military. Unfortunately for Frank, his involvement in the war was brief. He was captured by Union forces, subsequently paroled, and returned home. During this period, Missouri was embroiled in the Civil War, split between Unionists and Confederates. The two factions engaged in numerous fierce confrontations, leading to guerrilla warfare that saw the Bushwhackers, aligned with the Confederacy, clashing with the Jayhawkers, who supported the Union. In 1863, Frank rejoined the conflict, becoming part of a guerrilla unit operating in Clay County. Occasionally, Frank and his fellow fighters sought refuge at the James Farm, where Zerelda, a staunch supporter of the secessionist cause, welcomed them with open arms. Jesse, at the age of 15, observed his brother and his companions with a sense of longing as he yearned to participate, but was repeatedly denied due to his youth. A few months later, Union troops raided the James Farm in search of Frank and his group. They interrogated Reuben Samuel, Zerelda's new husband, and subjected him to torture by briefly hanging him from a tree. Reports indicate that young Jesse was also whipped during the soldiers' search. Previously, Frank had taken refuge in the woods to evade Unionist forces. By this time, he had experienced numerous adventures before ultimately joining a guerrilla band led by William Quantrill, a notorious bushwhacker. Under Quantrill's leadership, Frank James encountered the formidable Cole Younger, a guerrilla known for his ambushes and for avenging the death of his father by killing many of the militiamen responsible. Frank accompanied Quantrill until the spring of 1864, at which point he became part of a new group of bushwhackers led by Fletch Taylor. It was within this unit that Jesse first participated in the conflict, despite being only 16 years old. The majority of the guerrillas in this group were under the age of 21, including young Archie Clement, an 18-year-old who would soon gain Jesse's admiration. Upon joining Fletch Taylor's band of bushwhackers, Jesse was compelled to swiftly acclimate to his new reality. He had entered a war characterized by a complete disregard for conventional rules, where inflicting pain, punishment, killing, and destruction were the norms. Every barn and stream transformed into a battlefield, with each civilian either an ally or a target. By engaging in this conflict, Jesse James effectively embarked on a quest to locate and eliminate as many adversaries as possible. Archie Clement emerged as one of his early mentors. Initially, Jesse and his fellow guerrillas ridiculed him for his lack of self-assurance. However, once he participated in his first kills, he earned their respect. One of his comrades remarked that he was the most skilled and precise fighter in the unit. Yet, as he entered the fray, a desire for vengeance began to haunt him. According to legend, he set out to track down the militiamen who had assaulted him at the James Farm. Subsequently, Jesse and his brother Frank departed from Fletch Taylor's squad in search of a new leader, leading them to encounter Missouri's most notorious bushwhacker, William Anderson, known as Bloody Bill. Similar to Archie Clement, Bloody Bill Anderson became a significant influence on Jesse. Now that he had joined this formidable troop, he found himself in the most perilous guerrilla organization in Missouri. Jesse James admired the manner in which his mentors instilled terror in their victims and aspired to emulate them in order to gain their respect. He observed some of the most brutal acts of savagery, including an incident where Anderson inflicted torture on a prisoner using a knife, severing both of his ears before ultimately executing him with a gunshot to the head. During the summer of 1864, young Jesse experienced his first significant injury. While riding on horseback with his older brother, he noticed an attractive saddle hanging on a fence. His own saddle was in a state of disrepair, prompting him to attempt to take it. However, as he reached for it, he heard a thud, and a bullet struck his chest. Jesse James endured considerable pain from this injury. He was so distressed that he allegedly confided in a friend about his desire for the Unionists to capture him and end his suffering. Fortunately, the injury was not as grave as it appeared, as the bullet missed any vital organs, allowing Jesse to return to riding a month later. On September 27, 1864, one of the most atrocious incidents of the American Civil War, was about to unfold. This massacre was instigated by the guerrilla group led by Bloody Bill Anderson, to which both Jesse and Frank were affiliated. The location was Centralia, Missouri, a small town centered around a Union supply depot, serving as a strategic target for secessionist guerrillas. At 9 a.m., Bloody Bill Anderson, accompanied by 80 guerrillas, including Jesse and Frank, entered Centralia. They plundered everything in sight before obstructing the railway line. As a train approached, the guerrillas halted it and boarded, segregating the 125 passengers into civilians and soldiers. Among them were 24 Union militiamen, all of whom were eager to return home. However, Bloody Bill Anderson had other plans. He commanded the Union soldiers to form a line and proclaimed, "From this time forward, I ask no quarter and give none. Every Federal soldier on whom I put my fingers shall die like a dog. If I get into your clutches, I expect death. The fate of all shall be death, and they will be condemned to hell. This is the destiny that awaits every soldier who falls into my grasp." Subsequently, the men under General Anderson's command opened fire, resulting in the demise of all Union soldiers present. The aftermath of this brutal assault sees the bodies scalped and mutilated, followed by the incineration of the train. In the wake of this massacre in October 1864, General Anderson appears to face the consequences of his actions as he is ambushed and shot. This incident leads to the separation of the James brothers. Frank reconnects with General Quantrill in Kentucky, while Jesse heads to Texas under the leadership of Archie Clement, a former lieutenant of Anderson. At the age of 17, Jesse James suffers a severe injury once more. While attempting to surrender near Lexington, Missouri, he is shot in the chest again. The .36 caliber bullet becomes lodged in his right lung, remaining there for the duration of his life. His recovery takes several months, coinciding with the conclusion of the Civil War. After 4 years of conflict, the war leaves a deeply divided America in its wake. A total of 620,000 soldiers lose their lives on both sides. The Union emerges triumphant, while the Confederate states are left to grapple with a bitter defeat. The impending Reconstruction Plan will soon dismantle the institution of slavery that had long sustained the Southern economy. Missouri, the home state of the James family, is among the most severely impacted. The Midwest has been ravaged by clashes between rebels and Unionists, resulting in widespread turmoil. Approximately 1 in 3 citizens has been killed in battle, murdered in their homes, displaced by guerrilla warfare, or forced to seek refuge elsewhere. At the conclusion of 1865, the James brothers returned to their family home. Jesse has healed from his injuries, and the Civil War has officially ended. He has witnessed the defeat of his camp after a protracted and brutal struggle, and the ramifications of this loss for the South leave him feeling unfulfilled. A deep-seated desire for vengeance resurfaces within him. The war has not only divided his nation, but has also rendered his family destitute. For Jesse, the notion of surrender is utterly unacceptable. He feels compelled to persist in the fight. By the end of winter 1865 to 1866, the James brothers are settled on the family farm. With the war concluded, Jesse understands the necessity of finding a means to support his family. This conflict has stripped him and his loved ones of their possessions, and he is resolute in his quest to reclaim what he perceives as rightfully his. Frustrated by the intrusive presence of Union soldiers in his vicinity, he is determined to take a stand. Thus, he formulates a plan and successfully identifies a course of action. Jesse recognizes that banks predominantly safeguard the wealth of the North, even within Southern institutions. As a result, he concludes that robbing banks may serve as an effective outlet for his grievances. Targeting banks and stealing from Union supporters becomes his focus. This presents an ideal opportunity for Jesse, particularly given the minimal security measures in place at banks during that period. With peace restored, he and his brother align themselves with former comrades from the war, including Archie Clemon, who leads their group. It is reported that they participated in the first daylight bank robbery during peacetime in the United States. Their chosen target is the Clay County Savings Association, located in Liberty, Missouri. This bank is owned by a Unionist, and on February 13, 1866, the bandits execute their heist, making off with $60,000, equivalent to nearly $1 million today, while also taking the life of an innocent bystander during their escape. Jesse James, motivated by both political symbolism and financial gain, has achieved his initial act of retribution against the North. The Unionist proprietor of the bank, incensed, subsequently offers a reward of $5,000 for the apprehension of the criminals. The incident captures the attention of newspapers across the state, marking the first occasion on which Jesse James is labeled a wanted man. Shortly thereafter, an event occurs that deepens his animosity towards the Northerners. On December 13, 1866, Archie Clemon, Jesse's mentor, comrade-in-arms, and closest friend, is killed by the state militia. This loss is devastating for Jesse, and it takes him considerable time to heal from the grief. Following Archie's death, Jesse assumes leadership and begins to consolidate power. He is on the verge of causing upheaval across the nation, though this remains unknown to the public. In the months succeeding their leader's demise, Jesse and his associates persist in their series of armed robberies, executing bank heists over the next 2 years. One such heist occurs in early March 1868. During this period, the James brothers, along with Cole Younger and 4 other former guerrillas, plan to rob a bank in Russellville, Kentucky, which is believed to be particularly affluent and vulnerable. In contrast to the Clay County Savings Association, this operation lacks any political motivation. The gang conducts reconnaissance of the site, and once prepared, they spring into action. During the robbery, a resident of Russellville is shot, and the outlaws escape with a haul of $9,000 in cash and $3,000 in gold coins, a significant achievement for them. The subsequent robbery of the Davis County Savings Association in Gallatin, Missouri, is the event that will truly elevate Jesse James to notoriety. On December 7, 1869, at 12:30 p.m., Jesse dismounts, drawing no suspicion from the townspeople of Gallatin at that moment. As he steps into the bank, he notices an employee seated at the rear of the room, positioned before the safe. Jesse appears to be searching for someone specific. He scrutinizes the cashier's features intently, seemingly indifferent to the allure of money on that particular day. At that moment, he reaches beneath his coat, retrieves a revolver, and cocks the hammer. Cox was responsible for the death of my brother, Bill Anderson, and I am determined to exact my revenge. Cox? Who is he referring to? In truth, Jesse believes he is confronting Samuel Cox, the individual accountable for the murder of his former leader and friend, the notorious Bill Anderson. However, he has mistaken the identity of the man before him, who is not connected to this Cox at all. Oblivious to this fact, he proceeds with his intentions and pulls the trigger. The bullet strikes the cashier's heart, and as the man begins to collapse from his chair, Jesse aims for his forehead and fires a second shot. The victim's screams echo outside, signaling that it is time for the criminals to make their escape. They seize the wallet left on the deceased cashier's desk and flee the scene. During their flight on horseback, the gang is met with gunfire from furious residents of Gallatin, narrowly avoiding death. Ultimately, the heist yields minimal financial gain, and Jesse, believing he has avenged his friend Bill, has in fact taken the life of an innocent bystander. Following the Gallatin robbery, Jesse James is first branded an outlaw in the press. The governor of Missouri, Thomas Crittenden, remember this name, offers a reward for his capture. It is after this tragic event that the legend of Jesse James begins to take shape, largely due to one individual, John Newman Edwards, the founder of the Kansas City Times, a newspaper based in Missouri. It is indeed challenging to discuss Jesse James without referencing John Edwards. Without Edwards, Jesse James might have faded into obscurity like many other criminals. A fervent advocate for the Confederate cause, Edwards sought avenues to advance his political beliefs. Upon encountering Jesse James, he recognized an opportunity to further his agenda. Following the Gallatin murder, he allied himself with the outlaw and publicized his deeds in the newspaper through a series of letters authored by Jesse himself. In these correspondences, the young rebel proclaims his innocence to the public. As time progressed, the nature of his writings took on a more political tone. Jesse extolled the Confederate cause while condemning the policies of his adversaries. Edwards would later remark that Jesse finds humor in everything, while Frank remains serious and unyielding. Jesse embodies a carefree, reckless spirit, while Frank is composed, serious, and poses a significant threat, always lurking in the shadows of society. Jesse is aware of the bounty on his head and contemplates the reasons behind it. Frank is also cognizant of this fact, yet it deeply frustrates him. Eventually, the James brothers united with their younger siblings, Cole, John, Jim, and Bob, to form the James Younger Gang, which included Clell Miller and other former bushwhackers. With this new alliance, Jesse continued his criminal activities. One notable incident occurred on June 3, 1871, in Iowa. On that day, Jesse, along with his brother Frank, Cole Younger, and Clell Miller, entered the town of Corydon. The streets were empty, as most townsfolk had congregated in the churchyard to hear a prominent speaker. Jesse and his gang proceeded to the bank, where only the cashier was present. Unsurprisingly, the robbery was effortless for the outlaws, who made off with approximately $6,000 from the safe before departing. On their return journey, they traversed the areas where the speaker had been addressing the audience, yet no one acknowledged their presence. Frustrated, one of the gang members admitted their wrongdoing to the crowd. Subsequently, Jesse and his associates departed the scene as if nothing had transpired. Nevertheless, this audacity would not go unpunished, as the proprietor of the looted bank sought the assistance of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, which would soon initiate a pursuit to apprehend Jesse James. The James Younger Gang re-emerged in April 1872 to execute a bank robbery in Columbia, Kentucky. This operation involved Jesse, Frank, Cole Younger, his brother John, and Clell Miller. On this occasion, the haul was rather insignificant, estimated between $600 and $1,500. During the heist, Jesse James and Cole Younger fatally shot the bank cashier who had refused to unlock the safe. In September of the same year, the gang struck once more, this time targeting a safe at a fair in Kansas City. Jesse James, along with Cole and John Younger, participated in what can only be described as a particularly disastrous robbery. Amidst the throngs of fairgoers, the bandits managed to secure a meager sum of approximately $900. And during their hasty retreat, they tragically trampled and killed a young girl with their horses. As time progressed, law enforcement continued to struggle in their efforts to apprehend Jesse and his gang. At that juncture, they remained unaware of the impending developments. Driven by a desire for retribution, Jesse James now set his sights on the vital lifelines of the Union, the railroads. In the 1870s, the expansion and development of railroads across the United States were occurring at a rapid pace. Jesse perceived this growth negatively, viewing it as yet another means of Northern oppression against the South. Consequently, he resolved to make railroads his next target. During this period, Locomotives were particularly vulnerable as they operated on single tracks, leaving them largely defenseless. Given that a substantial amount of Northern capital was transported via these railways, it is not surprising that Confederate outlaws set their sights on this lucrative target. It represented an ideal opportunity for them. Their inaugural train heist occurred on July 21, 1873, in a remote area west of Adair, Iowa. Jesse, along with Frank, the younger brothers, Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell, made their way to a secluded section of the railroad. Their objective was the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad train. The chosen location was strategic as the railroad curved, necessitating a reduction in the train's speed. Armed with a crowbar and a hammer, they prepared to sabotage the tracks and then concealed themselves approximately 15 meters away, awaiting the locomotive's arrival. At 8:30 p.m., the steam engine drew near. This was the moment for the bandits to execute their plan. They pulled a rope connected to a rail, diverting it from its intended path. As the train approached the bend and the dislodged rail, it came to an abrupt halt. However, it was too late. The outlaws opened fire, resulting in several cars overturning. The train engineer was tragically killed, crushed beneath the weight of the locomotive. Stunned by the chaos they had just unleashed, the gangsters quickly proceeded with their scheme. To carry out the robbery, they donned a rather shocking disguise, wearing masks that represented the Ku Klux Klan. Jesse took charge of the safe. He leaped into the express car, removed his mask, and aimed his revolver at the guard, threatening, "If you do not open the safe or provide me with the key, I will shoot you." The key was surrendered to him without any opposition, and Jesse discovered a significantly lesser amount of loot than the gang had expected, totaling approximately $2,337. Following this, the bandits mounted their horses and made their escape to the south. The entire robbery transpired in a mere 10 minutes. The railroad company that fell victim to the crime offered a reward of $5,000 for the apprehension of the perpetrators, and the incident garnered national media attention. During the assault on the train, one of the outlaws reportedly addressed the passengers. "We are not mere petty thieves. We are audacious robbers, taking from the wealthy to give to the impoverished. We have no intention of causing you harm." Jesse and his gang appeared to aspire to the persona of Robin Hood, positioning themselves as champions of the oppressed workers against the affluent corporations. While this rhetoric may have seemed noble at first glance, their choice of disguise that day was met with disapproval by a segment of the American populace. Although the Ku Klux Klan had been dismantled in the South under President Ulysses Grant, the bandits' use of masks was, in a sense, contentious. Nevertheless, Jesse James solidified his status as a notorious outlaw. In the southern states, he was increasingly viewed not as a criminal, but as a folk hero. His commitment to the Confederate cause was indisputable, and the stagecoach robbery that occurred between Malvern and Hot Springs in Arkansas on January 15, 1874, served as a prime example. On that occasion, Jesse and his gang pilfered a watch from a Confederate veteran, unaware at the time of his past service to the Confederacy, and they later returned it. They asserted that their intention was not to rob Confederate veterans, but rather Northern individuals who had driven them to a life of crime, and they sought to make them accountable. On January 31, 1874, the James Younger gang executed their second train robbery. This heist took place in Gads Hill, Missouri, with the James brothers, Cole, John, and Bob Younger, participating in the operation. The previous night, the gang had observed several men walking along the train platform. In order to execute their plan, the outlaws captured these individuals and bound them. Subsequently, they acquired a red flag, which is typically used to indicate imminent danger, and positioned themselves to await the train's arrival. It appeared that the train was transporting a substantial sum of money. Although the locomotive was delayed by an hour and a half, and the bandits endured the frigid January temperatures for an extended period, they remained prepared. One of the gang members waved the red flag, compelling the train to reduce its speed. The conductor emerged to investigate the situation when, unexpectedly, one of the bandits advanced, seized him by the collar, and pressed a revolver against his forehead. "Remain still, or I will blow your head off," he threatened. The outlaw then turned towards the locomotive, addressing the passengers, and warned, "If a shot is fired from the car, I will kill the conductor." Similar to their previous heist in Iowa, the gang donned masks resembling those of the Ku Klux Klan. Their strategy closely mirrored that of their initial train robbery. Inside the train, the vault keeper, armed with a revolver, anxiously awaited the arrival of the intruders. Suddenly, a masked figure appeared in the doorway, prompting the keeper to aim his weapon, momentarily paralyzed. To his shock, he found not one, but two bandits confronting him. At that instant, one of them aimed his rifle directly at the keeper's chest. "Hand over your pistol, you son of a bitch!" commanded the bandit. The keeper, reluctant to assume the role of a hero, promptly complied and surrendered the vault key. The outlaws made off with approximately $1,080. After depleting the vault, they proceeded through the rows of passengers, robbing them of their money and jewelry. The bandits meticulously examined the hands of each man, assuring the passengers that they have no desire to rob workers or women, and that their primary focus is on the money and valuables belonging to the gentlemen wearing hats. After relieving the train passengers of their possessions, the group of outlaws swiftly escapes, vanishing before the locomotive resumes its journey. In total, they managed to steal nearly $2,000. In an unusual turn of events, the robbers leave behind a press release for a local newspaper, proclaiming it to be the most audacious robbery on record. This morning, 5 heavily armed men executed a robbery on the southbound train of the Iron Mountain Railroad, making off with a substantial sum. The press release goes on to detail the events that transpired after the heist, illustrating that everything unfolded according to their meticulous plan. Jesse James and his gang have successfully completed their second train robbery, demonstrating an unyielding momentum. With each successive heist, they enhance their techniques and show no indication of diminishing their activities. Meanwhile, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which was called upon by the bank owner whose establishment was robbed in Iowa, is also contacted by the Adams Express Company, the entity that owned the safe that was burglarized at Gads Hill. They are resolute in their mission to capture the James Younger gang and seek the expertise of the agency's leader, Alan Pinkerton. At that time, Alan Pinkerton was the most renowned private detective in the nation. He rose to fame during the Civil War for his role in safeguarding Abraham Lincoln in Washington and for thwarting an assassination attempt against him. The agency, founded by staunch Unionists opposed to slavery, was established in the 1850s. The Pinkerton Agency, an early forerunner of the FBI and CIA, was established with the primary objective of surveilling and tracking professional criminals. A significant milestone in its history occurred in 1868, when the agency successfully apprehended the Reno Gang, notorious for executing the first 3 train robberies during peacetime in the United States. Following the Gads Hill robbery, the Adams Express Company reached out to Alan Pinkerton. Pinkerton's directive was to eliminate Jesse James. To accomplish this, he assigned one of his most skilled agents, Detective Joseph Witcher, with the task of traveling to Clay County, infiltrating the James family farm, and gathering extensive intelligence. Upon his arrival, however, Witcher encountered unexpected difficulties. Local law enforcement declined to provide any assistance, compelling him to adopt the disguise of a farm laborer in order to collect the necessary information. Even while in this disguise, he faced significant obstacles in obtaining the intelligence he sought. As a northerner, Witcher found himself in a hostile environment. Jesse James had numerous allies in Clay County, and in the southern regions, he was celebrated as a hero for his actions avenging the Confederates through his various robberies. Compounding the challenge, very few individuals were familiar with Jesse James's appearance. Unless one had grown up with him or fought alongside him, recognizing him would be nearly impossible. Ultimately, the authorities were left with only vague and inconsistent eyewitness accounts. Remarkably, even his own son, who would be born later, was unaware of his true identity. For Whicher, the mission was anything but straightforward. Nevertheless, he persevered and ultimately succeeded in locating the James farm. To infiltrate the situation, Whicher plans to disguise himself as a laborer in search of employment. Upon his arrival at the farm, he is greeted by Zerelda James, to whom he expresses his desire to work in her fields. However, he remains unaware that his fair skin and uncalloused hands will reveal his true identity. Despite receiving a warning from the former sheriff about the dangers posed by the old woman, who was said to be lethal if her sons did not act first, Whicher remains self-assured. What unfolds next remains uncertain. What is known is that Joseph Whicher is discovered shot 3 times along a rural road in Jackson County. Jesse James and his brother Frank, along with another accomplice, are suspected of being involved in the murder. In the aftermath of Joseph Whicher's death, Jesse is consumed by a profound anger. Nothing provokes his fury more than the feeling of being pursued. Nevertheless, as time progresses, the outlaw begins to regain his composure. He chooses to marry his first cousin, Z. Mims, with whom he will eventually have 2 children. During their honeymoon, rumors emerge that Jesse and his gang have robbed multiple stagecoaches, indicating that he has not wasted any time. Meanwhile, Alan Pinkerton becomes aware of Whicher's demise. This incident represents one of his most significant failures. Resolute in his pursuit of justice, he seeks retribution against Jesse. The James Younger gang continues their criminal activities, this time targeting a train near Muncie, Kansas. The robbery occurs on December 8, 1874, resulting in the bandits making off with $30,000, which is equivalent to $750,000 today. At 27 years old, Jesse appears to be thriving as one of the most notorious outlaws of his era, gaining national recognition through the writings of Edwards, who romanticizes his exploits. With a beloved wife by his side, Jesse has successfully evaded the formidable Pinkerton agency. Who would not feel invincible in such a position? Yet the battle was far from over, as his long-standing adversaries were preparing to retaliate. Following the murder of Joseph Whicher and his subsequent disgrace, Alan Pinkerton, the leader of a renowned private detective agency, is resolute in his pursuit of justice. He believes that the end justifies the means and is prepared to operate beyond legal constraints. The events transpire on the night of January 25, 1875, when a contingent of agents under Pinkerton's command encircles the James farm, detonates a bomb, and demolishes the residence in an attempt to capture Jesse. The aftermath of this explosion is catastrophic. Zerelda James, who was present that evening, suffers severe injuries to her right arm, necessitating amputation. Tragically, Archie, Jesse's 8-year-old half-brother, succumbs to injuries sustained in the explosion. Meanwhile, Jesse and his brother Frank are fortuitously absent, having left the premises just hours before the raid, narrowly escaping the agent's grasp. The relentless pursuit by the detective only fuels Jesse's rage upon hearing the news. He perceives Alan Pinkerton and his operatives as the oppressors of the North, embodying the ultimate malevolence as they flout the law for the benefit of powerful interests. This realization intensifies his desire for retribution, particularly since the agents involved in the raid faced no legal consequences. Jesse's retaliation is prompt. On April 12, 1875, he shoots Daniel Eskew, a neighbor of the James farm, and a former Union militiaman who assisted Pinkerton's detectives during the raid. Following this act of vengeance, Alan Pinkerton withdraws from pursuing the James Younger gang, marking a significant defeat in his career. Jesse James's defiance has tarnished Pinkerton's reputation irreparably. With the detectives' retreat, the outlaws proceed with their plans, now targeting a train robbery near Otterville, Missouri. The gang comprises Jesse and Frank James, Cole and Bob Younger, Lel Miller, Charlie Pitts, Bill Chadwell, and a newcomer named Hobbs Carey. The robbery is scheduled for July 7, 1876, with the total haul amounting to $18,300, a considerable sum intended to finance the outlaws' journey to Minnesota. Why Minnesota, you may ask? It had been over a month since Jesse and his gang devised a bold plan for a bank heist. On the surface, executing a second robbery in such a short time frame appeared illogical. The risks involved would have been exceedingly high, particularly following the successful train heist of such scale. In truth, the outlaws seemed less concerned with the monetary gain at that moment. Their true motivation lay elsewhere. They were eager to take decisive action against their adversaries. The meticulously planned operation by the James Younger gang was set into motion 2 months after the Otterville robbery, with the date marked for September 7, 1876. Jesse and his associates were making their way to a tranquil town in Minnesota. The concept for the heist originated from Jesse James and Bob Younger. They intended to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, an unexpected target given its distance from their usual operations and its location in enemy territory in the north. Despite Frank James and Cole Younger's attempts to dissuade their younger siblings from pursuing this reckless endeavor, they were ultimately unsuccessful. Jesse's personal vendetta appeared boundless. The rural bank they selected was not particularly affluent. However, the outlaws targeted it due to its connection with Adelbert Ames, the Unionist governor of Mississippi. On that particular day, the gang comprised Jesse, Frank, Cole, Jim, and Bob Younger, along with Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell. To execute this remarkable heist, the outlaws opted to divide into 3 distinct groups. One group was designated to enter the First National Bank, another group was assigned to maintain surveillance outside, while the final group was responsible for safeguarding their predetermined escape route. Jesse and Bob volunteered to infiltrate the bank, as they were the masterminds behind the operation. Frank also joined them. Meanwhile, Cole Younger and Clell Miller took their positions outside the bank to keep watch over the surroundings. Jim Younger, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell were assigned to provide rear guard support. The plan was structured as follows. Jesse, Frank, and Bob would first enter the town of Northfield, crossing the bridge that led to the town square around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Subsequently, Cole Younger and Clell Miller would make their entrance into the town. At that moment, Jesse's group would proceed into the bank. Once Cole and Clell reached the vicinity of the building, Jim's group would enter Northfield to secure the escape route. After the robbery was completed, the outlaws would convene at the designated exit point. Bill, Clell, and Bob would then sever the telegraph lines, facilitating the gang's getaway. It was ultimately agreed that no harm should come to any citizen. If they were fired upon, they would return fire, but were strictly instructed to avoid any fatalities. Jesse, Frank, and Bob crossed the bridge and made their way toward the town square. There they took a seat on crates, awaiting the arrival of Cole and Clell. Shortly thereafter, the second group entered the town. At precisely 2 p.m., Jesse, Bob, and Frank entered the First National Bank, leaving the door slightly ajar. Cole and Clell arrived at the bank and dismounted from their horses. Noticing the bank's front door ajar, Clell promptly closed it. The 2 men then waited patiently outside. Cole rides his horse leisurely down the center of the street, feigning an adjustment of the saddle strap while Clell enjoys his pipe in front of the bank. Meanwhile, Jim, Charlie, and Bill arrive at their assigned cover point, remaining composed on their horses. Inside the bank, Jesse and his accomplices identify the 3 bank employees: Alonzo Bunker, the teller, Joseph Lee Haywood, the acting cashier, and Frank Wilcox, the accountant. Without hesitation, they draw their firearms and aim them at the employees. "Raise your hands, for we are here to rob the bank. If you make a sound, we will blow your brains out." The trio of outlaws then vaults over the counter. Jesse inquires if Haywood is the cashier, to which Haywood replies in the negative. The same question is directed at Bunker and Wilcox, but neither affirms. Jesse then focuses on Haywood. "You are the cashier. Now open the safe, you miserable son of a bitch." Haywood, however, refuses to comply. Meanwhile, Frank approaches the vault to examine the safe, while Bob keeps his weapon trained on the other 2 employees. Just as Frank is about to enter the room, Haywood suddenly lunges at the door, trying to lock him inside. Frank narrowly escapes, but sustains injuries to his arm and hand. Bob retaliates by striking Haywood with the butt of his revolver, causing him to collapse. The robbery is already proving to be a disaster. Outside, the situation is equally dire. 2 citizens of Northfield quickly notice the suspicious behavior of Cole Younger and Clell Miller in front of the bank. One of them approaches the building, but Clell intervenes by seizing him by the collar. Despite this, the individual manages to glimpse the unfolding events through a bank window. "You son of a bitch, don't you shout." At that moment, Clell makes a critical error. Instead of pushing the man into the bank to maintain discretion, he releases him outside. The Northfield resident quickly alerts his fellow townspeople. "Arm yourselves, gentlemen. The bank is being robbed. Robbery! Robbery!" Clell then fires at the assailant, narrowly missing his head. The situation was deteriorating. Cole and Clell mount their horses and charge through the streets, calling out to their accomplices inside the bank, "Hurry! Hurry!" Meanwhile, Jim, Bill, and Charlie hear the initial gunshot and rush to assist, firing into the air to deter the townsfolk. Unfortunately, their efforts prove insufficient. The citizens of Northfield had already armed themselves and began returning fire. Bullets whizzed from every direction. Inside the bank, the initial group struggled to open the safe. Haywood, still on the floor after being struck by Bob's gun, finds himself confronted by Jesse, who kneels beside him, draws a knife, and presses it against the cashier's neck. "Open that door, or we will slit your throat." Terrified, Haywood replies that Jesse may as well cut him, as he is unable to open it. Frustrated, Jesse makes a small incision on Haywood's neck, and then aims his revolver at him, demanding once more that he open the safe. The cashier finally reveals that the safe is on a timer and cannot be opened at this moment. Haywood was indeed telling the truth. The safe was equipped with a timer, but it had not been activated. In reality, the safe had remained locked, unbeknownst to the outlaws. At that moment, Bob busies himself gathering the scattered bills into a bag, while Frank keeps a watchful eye on Wilcox, the bank's accountant. For Bunker, the teller, this presents a chance to escape. He hurriedly makes his way to the rear exit when Bob spots him and begins to pursue. A shot is fired, striking Bunker in the shoulder, which causes him to falter. However, he quickly regains his footing and escapes. Cole then positions himself in front of the bank and calls out to Jesse, Frank, and his brother Bob. "Move quickly! The alarm has been raised!" Bullets whiz past in every direction as Cole attempts to defend himself. At that moment, he notices a young man standing frozen in the street, paralyzed by fear. From his horse, Cole shouts at the young man, "Get off the street." Unfortunately, the young man, a Swedish immigrant, neither spoke nor understood English, rendering him unable to comprehend Cole's warning. Tragically, he is struck in the head by a bullet and succumbs to his injuries days later. Meanwhile, Clell Miller rides toward the bank to urge Jesse and the others to hurry, but as he departs and remounts his horse, he is shot. Clell cries out in agony but continues to fire his revolvers. Simultaneously, both Cole and Jim sustain gunshot wounds to their left shoulders. "They're killing our men! Get out here!" Inside, Jesse is seething with anger. He had fired a shot into the ground, narrowly missing Haywood's head, but this proves too much for Bob, who decides to flee the heist. With his bag of money in hand, he rushes outside, followed closely by Jesse, with Frank bringing up the rear. As they exit the bank, Frank claims to have seen Haywood rise, draw a small-caliber pistol, and aim it at him. In a swift motion, he executes the cashier. Once outside, Jesse and Frank mount their horses and charge down the street, where gunfire continues to erupt. Ultimately, what remains of the James Younger gang manages to escape the town of Northfield. The robbery was a complete failure, resulting in the deaths of Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell, and they had only managed to steal a meager $26. Their struggle, however, was far from concluded. The most extensive manhunt in American history was about to commence. The residents of Northfield had bravely confronted the formidable James Younger gang. Now that they had successfully driven the gang from their town, they were determined to ensure that justice was served. Their objective? To apprehend the criminals and hold them accountable. News of their pursuit quickly spread across the nation, mobilizing at least 1,000 individuals for this unprecedented manhunt. As they fled, the outlaws rode as swiftly as their horses could carry them, heading southward. After a week, the fugitives remained on the run, but found themselves in a precarious situation. Their horse had been lost. Now on foot they traveled westward. The younger brothers were injured, some had lost their coats, suffering from the cold, and all were desperately hungry. The bandits made the decision to divide into two groups, with Jesse and Frank taking one path and the others taking another. Throughout their escape, the James brothers, though fatigued, pressed on toward Dakota Territory. Ultimately, after traversing hundreds of miles through hostile land and evading over 1,000 pursuers, Jesse and Frank emerged from their ordeal unscathed. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for their companions. Charlie Pitts, Bob, and Cole Younger, weakened by hunger, became careless during their flight and were apprehended by law enforcement. A shootout ensued, resulting in Charlie Pitts's death. The younger brothers, gravely injured, would soon face life sentences in prison. Despite their incarceration, they remained steadfastly loyal to the James brothers, never betraying them. Under assumed identities, Jesse and Frank spent the next 3 years living quietly in Nashville, Tennessee. For Frank, this was a fulfilling existence as he embraced life as a farmer. For Jesse, however, the situation was quite different. He struggled to adjust to his new life. Having faced his first significant defeat as an outlaw, his thirst for vengeance remained undiminished. Jesse subsequently assembles a new gang and resumes his criminal activities, albeit without Frank, who is in the process of partially retiring. The new group undertakes several heists, but their effectiveness pales in comparison to Jesse's previous operations. His current associates lack the experience of his former guerrilla companions. As tensions rise, the gang members begin to turn on one another and are swiftly apprehended. Throughout this time, Jesse remains a wanted man across the nation. Reports suggest that he grew increasingly distrustful of his crew, to the point where he is rumored to have killed one of them. In the spring of 1880, a friend introduces him to two young brothers from Missouri, Charlie and Robert Ford. Jesse quickly forms a bond with Charlie, the elder sibling, and recruits him into his gang. The heists persist, but eventually the gang dwindles to just 2 members, Jesse James and Charlie Ford. With a bounty of $5,000 on his head, Jesse must remain vigilant. With only Charlie at his side, he feels a sense of unease. Furthermore, as he plans to rob a bank in Platte City, he realizes the necessity of an additional reliable accomplice. He identifies this individual in Charlie's brother, Robert Ford. Unbeknownst to Jesse, Robert Ford has been engaged in covert discussions with Missouri's governor, Thomas Crittenden, who had previously been mentioned. Crittenden had prioritized Jesse's capture, offering a substantial reward to Robert Ford in exchange for his assistance. Having accepted this proposition, Robert now finds himself within Jesse's ranks and understands that he must act. He confides in his older brother Charlie, and both brothers, gripped by fear, come to terms with the daunting challenge that lies ahead. Charlie remarked that he was aware of the fact that the other man was faster than he was, and he would refrain from attempting anything while the man had his arms on. The individual was exceedingly vigilant, making it impossible for anyone to catch him off guard. Despite feeling intimidated, Charlie and Robert Ford remained resolute in their objective, biding their time for the opportune moment to achieve the seemingly unattainable. On April 3, 1882, Jesse and the Ford brothers were gearing up to execute their bank heist in Platte City. Prior to this, the trio of outlaws enjoyed breakfast at the James residence in St. Joseph, Missouri. Following their meal, Jesse and Charlie proceeded to the stable to tend to the horses. Upon their return, they entered the living room where Robert was waiting. At that moment, Jesse felt a sense of discomfort. Feeling overheated in his clothing, he removed his coat, unfastened his vest, and tossed them onto his bed. He then declared loudly, "I suppose I will remove my pistols to avoid anyone noticing them while I walk in the yard." He unbuckled his belt and set his revolvers down on the couch. In the adjacent room were his wife, Z, and their children. Jesse then glanced up, noticed a painting in the living room, and began to dust it. Suddenly, Jesse James heard a sound that was all too familiar. Robert Ford had just cocked the hammer of his revolver. Jesse turned around, but the shot had already been fired. The bullet struck him just behind the head. The Ford brothers had triumphed. They had just eliminated the most wanted man in America. The news of Jesse James's assassination soon dominated headlines in newspapers nationwide. Over 2,000 individuals gathered to attend the funeral of the notorious outlaw, eager to catch a glimpse of his remains. At that time, many had already begun to view him as a hero, but the events surrounding his demise had now transformed him into a martyr. Following the assassination of Jesse James, Charlie and Robert Ford surrendered to law enforcement, who subsequently charged them with first-degree murder. They would later enter a guilty plea, receive a death sentence by hanging, and obtain a pardon from Governor Crittenden, all within the same day. Ultimately, they would only collect a fraction of the reward before fleeing the state of Missouri. They would go on to perform as a spectacle, reenacting the murder across the nation. Charlie Ford, afflicted with tuberculosis and struggling with a morphine addiction, took his own life on May 6, 1884, in Richmond. Meanwhile, Robert Ford would remain forever marked by his reputation as the coward who killed Jesse James, ultimately meeting his end in a saloon 10 years later. His assailant would be sentenced to life imprisonment, but would later receive a pardon from the governor of Colorado after a petition with 7,000 signatures advocated for his release. Following the death of his younger brother, Frank James would surrender to authorities and face murder charges in Missouri. He would be acquitted, as he would be in 2 additional cases brought against him. Once exonerated, he would retreat to a peaceful existence on his family's farm, passing away in 1915 in the very room of his birth. In contrast, Jesse's widow would die in solitude and destitution. Jesse James, therefore, emerges as a far more intricate figure than one might initially perceive. He was not merely a common outlaw driven by greed. Rather, he was an individual who championed a political cause. Throughout his life, Jesse was propelled by a profound sense of retribution against those who had previously bested him. His narrative ultimately illustrates how the tumult of an era and the experiences of a lifetime can profoundly transform a person's character. It is undeniable that this story, both tragic and captivating, will be recounted with fervor for many years to come. Our exploration of the Wild West has now reached its conclusion. I appreciate your attention and hope you found this narrative enjoyable. Should you have liked this presentation, please consider liking the video and sharing it. Your support would be immensely valued. I also want to express my gratitude for your encouragement on the previous video. If you have any feedback, please feel free to share it, as it is essential for my improvement. Until we meet again, take care and see you soon.